Beneath the polished surface of Golden Age Hollywood, where charm and glamour were sold as truth, many actors lived double lives hidden from the public eye. Back then, authenticity came at a steep price, one that could end a career overnight. To survive, some stars kept their hearts in the shadows, shielding their private truths from a judgmental world. In this video, we're uncovering the hidden romantic lives of 25 beloved male actors. Stories filled with secrecy, courage, and the quiet resilience to love on their own terms. Their personal struggles remind us that fame often comes with a silence far heavier than the spotlight ever reveals. Carrie Grant. To the outside world, he was the epitome of suave sophistication, an icon whose image was polished to perfection. But behind the closed doors of Hollywood's most exclusive homes, Cary Grant's personal life was far more complicated. Although he was married 5 times to women, whispers about his close bond with fellow actor Randolph Scott never faded. The two men met in the early 1930s and quickly formed a deep connection. They shared a beachfront home in Malibu for over a decade, where they were often photographed cooking, sunbathing, or relaxing like a married couple. While studios worked hard to present these images as playful bachelor fun, insiders suspected otherwise. Their residence became known as Bachelor Hall, but some saw it as a safe haven for a relationship that couldn't be openly acknowledged. Grant's partnership with designer Ori Kelly in his early career further added to speculation. Ori Kelly, who was openly gay, later wrote a memoir describing a deeply affectionate bond with Grant, though the book wasn't published until long after their time together. Later in life, rumors also tied Grant to Hollywood fixer Scotty Bowers, who claimed he arranged same-sex encounters for the star. Despite persistent gossip, Grant always denied any romantic involvement with men. He once quipped, "I'm not going through life with one hand tied behind my back, just to please a few people." His charm and ambiguity allowed him to maintain his leading man status while keeping his private world just that, private. Randolph Scott. In an era when masculinity was measured by rugged charm and silent strength, Randolph Scott built a career as one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men. But beyond the cowboy hats and frontier roles, his private life drew quiet speculation, especially his long domestic partnership with Cary Grant. Their shared Malibu home, affectionately nicknamed Bachelor Hall, wasn't just a bachelor pad in the traditional sense. For over a decade, the two men lived together, often photographed in intimate everyday moments, lounging poolside, cooking in the kitchen, or relaxing in matching robes. These images defied the conventional image of male friendship at the time, and despite studio efforts to spin their bond as platonic, the rumors persisted. Though Scott eventually married, many believe his wedding was more about public appearance than personal connection. Throughout their time together, he and Grant were inseparable. Hollywood insiders often commented on how comfortable and natural the pair seemed as a couple, both on and off the camera. Unlike others who denied or dodged the speculation, Scott simply stayed silent. He never commented publicly on the nature of his relationship with Grant or addressed questions about his own sexuality. That silence, whether strategic or personal, left room for ongoing fascination. To this day, the true nature of their bond remains unconfirmed, but their quiet companionship, preserved in photographs and remembered in anecdotes, tells a story of two men who perhaps found peace with each other in a world that demanded secrecy. Rock Hudson. To millions of moviegoers, he was the embodiment of the perfect leading man, tall, handsome, and irresistibly charming. But behind that all-American image, Rock Hudson carried a truth that he could never publicly acknowledge during his lifetime. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Hudson starred in romantic dramas and comedies opposite Hollywood's most glamorous women. Studios carefully crafted his persona as a devoted ladies' man, often arranging public dates with actresses to reinforce the illusion. Yet in private, Hudson had deeply personal relationships with men, including a long-term partner named Mark Christian. Friends, colleagues, and insiders often knew about his true identity, but remained silent out of loyalty and respect. In an industry driven by image, discretion was essential. Hudson's world was carefully compartmentalized, one side for the cameras, the other hidden from view. It wasn't until the 1980s that his private life became public knowledge. When Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS, it sparked widespread media attention and global awareness about a disease that had been largely ignored. His condition made headlines, not only because of his fame, but because it shattered the illusion that someone so beloved and masculine could live such a hidden life. Hudson never publicly discussed his sexuality, but his bravery in facing his illness helped bring visibility to a crisis and compassion to a community often marginalized. Even in silence, he became an unexpected symbol of quiet strength, and his legacy lives on as both a cinematic legend and a figure of resilience in the face of immense pressure. Tab Hunter. He was the golden boy of 1950s Hollywood, blonde, blue-eyed, and built to be a heartthrob. On screen, Tab Hunter was the image of wholesome masculinity, often cast as the ideal boyfriend or clean-cut leading man. But off-screen, he lived with a secret that could have ended his career in an instant. Behind the scenes, Hunter was involved in meaningful relationships with men, including a well-known romance with figure skater Ronnie Robertson, and a more discreet connection with fellow actor Anthony Perkins. At a time when even rumors of same-sex relationships could destroy a public image, Hunter was forced to hide his truth. The pressure became overwhelming in 1955, when the tabloid Confidential threatened to expose him. In a scramble to protect their rising star, Warner Brothers orchestrated a campaign to manage his image, pairing him with famous actresses for publicity and carefully steering the media narrative. The illusion of the all-American heartthrob was maintained, but the cost was emotional isolation. For decades, Hunter lived a double life, constantly managing the expectations of his fans and the reality of his private relationships. It wasn't until 2005 that he publicly embraced his truth in his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, which later became a documentary of the same name. By sharing his story late in life, Tab Hunter offered a powerful message about personal authenticity, resilience, and the quiet strength it took to survive the Hollywood system. His journey remains a reminder of how many had to hide who they were, just to keep working in the industry they loved. Anthony Perkins. Audiences will always remember him as Norman Bates, the quiet, haunted character in Psycho, whose eerie charm left a lasting mark on cinema. But behind Anthony Perkins' chilling performance was a man wrestling with his own inner contradictions, forced to conceal his identity in a world that had no tolerance for deviation from the norm. During the 1950s and 60s, Perkins carefully protected his private life. While he eventually married photographer Barry Berenson and had children, he also maintained secret relationships with men. Among the most talked about was his connection with actor Tab Hunter, a bond that had to remain hidden due to the immense pressure both faced from their studios and the public. Perkins was also linked to renowned ballet dancer and choreographer Rudolf Nureyev, though details of their time together remain largely private. These were not casual encounters. They were relationships forged in the margins of an industry that demanded silence. Like many actors of his generation, Perkins was caught between his personal truth and his public image. The roles he chose sometimes reflected his dual life, complex characters who appeared reserved on the surface but struggled with suppressed emotion beneath. In the final years of his life, Perkins faced a health crisis that quietly brought his private world into public view. He passed away in the early 1990s due to AIDS-related complications, never having openly discussed his sexuality. Though he never had the chance to speak freely about his truth, the quiet heartbreak behind Perkins' performances resonates more deeply when seen through the lens of what he endured. His story is one of brilliance wrapped in restraint, and of a man who gave everything to his craft while holding so much of himself back. James Dean. He became the symbol of youthful rebellion and emotional depth, capturing a generation's restlessness with just 3 major films. Yet James Dean's off-screen life was even more enigmatic than the characters he portrayed. While women adored him and studios framed him as a rising heartthrob, there were whispers of another truth, one that didn't fit the image being sold. Throughout his short life, Dean formed intense bonds with both men and women. His relationship with producer Rogers Brackett was particularly noteworthy, with some believing it played a key role in advancing Dean's career. Though the nature of their connection was never publicly confirmed, those close to Dean described it as deeply personal and emotionally layered. Rumors also linked Dean to actor Marlon Brando. Their dynamic was described by some as electric and complicated, with Brando allegedly keeping Dean at arm's length while maintaining emotional control. Whether romantic or not, their bond intrigued many who saw parallels in their rebellious personas and quiet vulnerabilities. Dean never publicly addressed these speculations. His early death at age 24 sealed his legacy as a mystery, one who never had to explain, defend, or clarify. Today, that ambiguity adds to his myth, leaving fans to wonder what truths may have lived just beneath the surface of Hollywood's most iconic outsider. Marlon Brando. No actor shattered the mold of Hollywood masculinity quite like Marlon Brando. He brought raw intensity and emotional realism to the screen, but his personal life was equally bold, if far less public. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Brando didn't completely shy away from addressing questions about his sexuality. Later in life, Brando openly acknowledged that he had experienced romantic and physical relationships with men. He expressed little shame or discomfort about these experiences, stating that love should not be confined by societal expectations. In a time when few dared speak such truths, his candor was striking. Speculation surrounded his connection with James Dean, with some insiders suggesting they shared a passionate but complex bond. Others pointed to his lifelong relationship with actor and writer Wally Cox. Brando was so emotionally attached to Cox that he kept his ashes near his bed for years after his passing, a gesture that stirred even more questions. Brando also had multiple high-profile relationships with women and fathered several children. His life defied simple categorization. He seemed less concerned with labels and more focused on emotional connection, regardless of gender. While Brando never went into detail about any one relationship, his honesty about his fluid attractions made him a rare figure. An icon who wasn't afraid to hint at his truth, even if the world wasn't quite ready to hear it. Montgomery Clift. Few actors captured vulnerability on screen like Montgomery Clift. With his haunted eyes and quiet intensity, he redefined what it meant to be a leading man. But the emotional depth he brought to his roles often mirrored the struggles he faced in real life, particularly when it came to his identity. Clift lived in a time when same-sex relationships were considered scandalous, especially for actors whose careers depended on romantic appeal. While he never publicly acknowledged his sexuality, those closest to him knew he had long-term relationships with men and lived much of his life carefully hiding that part of himself. Throughout his career, he formed close emotional bonds, including a deep friendship with Elizabeth Taylor, who fiercely protected his privacy. Taylor became his confidant and advocate, standing by him through his personal battles and ongoing attempts to maintain control in an industry built on illusion. Clift's life wasn't without its hardships. The pressure of secrecy, combined with a serious car accident and ongoing emotional struggles, led him down a path of isolation and substance abuse. Still, he continued to deliver powerful performances in films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. His legacy is one of raw talent and inner turmoil, a man whose work changed Hollywood, but whose private pain was often just beneath the surface. Montgomery Clift never needed to speak his truth aloud. His performances spoke volumes. Sal Mineo. Known for his role as the sensitive, misunderstood teen in Rebel Without a Cause, Sal Mineo brought an emotional honesty to the screen that few could match. But the openness in his performances stood in stark contrast to the guarded reality of his personal life. Mineo rose to fame in the 1950s, a time when being openly attracted to the same sex could end a career. While he never came out publicly during his lifetime, those close to him were aware of his relationships with men. He often confided in trusted friends and gradually began exploring queer themes in his work, both on stage and behind the scenes. In the 1960s and 70s, Mineo took creative risks that hinted at his personal truths. He directed Fortune in Men's Eyes, a play about men in prison and the dynamics of power and vulnerability, and starred in P.S. Your Cat is Dead, playing a character who defied traditional labels. These choices weren't accidental. They reflected a desire to bring visibility to stories rarely told in mainstream media. Despite his talent and bravery, Mineo found it difficult to regain the same level of fame he had known as a young actor. His quiet attempts to live authentically were often overshadowed by public misunderstanding. Though he faced challenges, Sal Mineo's work left a lasting impression. his legacy continues to resonate with audiences who see in him a reflection of courage, complexity, and a quiet fight for authenticity in a time of silence. Liberace. He dazzled audiences with glittering costumes, flamboyant piano performances, and over-the-top charm. Liberace was one of the most recognizable entertainers of his era, beloved by fans across generations. But while his stage persona was larger than life, his personal truth was something he denied until the very end. Though Liberace never publicly came out, his sexuality was widely speculated. His long-term relationship with Scott Thorson became the center of both media attention and legal disputes. Thorson, decades younger, claimed they shared a romantic and emotional bond, a story later portrayed in the film Behind the Candelabra. Despite the public drama, Liberace insisted the relationship was purely professional. To protect his image, he filed and won lawsuits against publications that implied he was gay, including a high-profile case against the Daily Mirror. He also countered Thorson's legal claims with fierce denials. In private, however, many in the industry acknowledged what the public only guessed. His flamboyant persona wasn't just for show. It wasn't until years after his passing that close friends, including Betty White, confirmed what many had long assumed. She revealed she had even been used as a beard to deflect attention from his real relationships. Liberace's story is one of duality, of a man who brought joy to millions while hiding a key part of himself. His life serves as a reminder of the painful trade-offs fame demanded from those who lived outside society's expectations. Durk Bogard. To the public, he was Britain's most beloved leading man, a figure of elegance, intelligence, and restraint. But behind Durk Bogard's polished image was a life of carefully guarded privacy, shared quietly with one person for nearly 4 decades. Bogard lived with his manager and close companion, Anthony Forwood, for almost 40 years. Though they never publicly acknowledged their relationship, those close to them understood the depth of their bond. It was an open secret in British film circles, and the two built a domestic life together far removed from Hollywood's spotlight. Studio contracts in Bogard's era often included morality clauses that prohibited any deviant behavior, leaving little room for personal freedom. Rumors alone could end a career. As a result, Bogard remained discreet. He never formally came out, nor did he speak openly about his private life. In 1961, he took a brave step professionally by starring in Victim, the first English-language film to use the word homosexual. His character, a man being blackmailed for his attraction to another man, was a bold departure from the roles expected of him and made a significant cultural impact. Though he never directly confirmed his identity, Bogard's actions spoke volumes. His quiet dignity, commitment to privacy, and subtle activism made him a quietly revolutionary figure, one who navigated fame while holding on to the life he built with someone he loved. Ramon Novaro. Before the rise of talkies, Ramon Novaro was one of silent film's most celebrated stars. With his striking features and commanding presence, he became a matinee idol during Hollywood's earliest golden years. But behind the fame, Novaro lived with a secret he could never publicly share. Born in Mexico and raised in a devout Catholic household, Novaro entered Hollywood just as it was shaping itself into a glamorous machine. His charm and talent quickly propelled him to stardom, especially after his iconic role in Ben-Hur, 1925. Studios promoted him as a Latin lover, feeding audiences an image carefully curated to maintain box office appeal. Privately, Novaro had relationships with men throughout his life. He confided in close friends, but public acknowledgement was impossible in an era when being openly gay could end a career. Religion, fame, and personal fear kept him guarded, and the double life took its toll. Despite fading from the spotlight in later years, Novaro never fully disappeared. He performed on stage and in television, always maintaining his poise and dignity. Those who knew him described him as kind, cultured, and deeply sensitive. His legacy, often overshadowed by the secrecy of his era, remains an important chapter in film history. Ramon Novaro's life is a reminder of the costs of fame at a time when authenticity was the riskiest move a star could make. Farley Granger. With classic good looks and a natural ease on screen, Farley Granger was one of Hollywood's most promising young stars in the 1940s and 50s. He gained attention for roles in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope and Strangers on a Train, but his personal life often drew more curiosity than his rising film career. Unlike many of his peers, Granger spoke openly later in life about his bisexuality. In his memoir, Include Me Out, he detailed his relationships with both men and women, including high-profile affairs with composer Leonard Bernstein and playwright Arthur Laurence. These weren't passing encounters. Many were deeply emotional, long-lasting connections. During his prime years in Hollywood, Granger was careful. Studios expected a clean-cut image, and he played the part, often attending events with female stars. But in private, he refused to be ashamed of who he was. Friends described him as honest, kind, and unwilling to hide, even if that limited his mainstream appeal. Granger eventually left the Hollywood spotlight to focus on theater, where he found more freedom to be himself. He remained close with his longtime partner, Robert Calhoun, until Calhoun's passing. Farley Granger's legacy is marked not only by his talent, but by his courage to live authentically. At a time when silence was the norm, he found strength in honesty and quietly carved a path for others to follow. George Nader. He may not have reached the same level of fame as his contemporaries, but George Nader carved out a lasting legacy, not just for his film roles, but for the quiet courage with which he lived his life. Handsome, talented, and charismatic, Nader was a rising star in the 1950s, appearing in adventure films and crime dramas that showcased his screen presence. Behind the camera, Nader maintained a long-term relationship with Mark Miller, a romance that lasted over 50 years. Their bond was an open secret within the Hollywood community, and while they kept a low profile publicly, their inner circle included figures like Rock Hudson. The three often socialized together, carefully navigating the social rules of the era. As Hudson's popularity soared, there were whispers that Nader had taken professional risks to shield his friend. One long-circulated story suggests that Universal Studios redirected focus onto Nader in certain tabloid negotiations to protect Hudson's carefully crafted image. Eventually, Nader left Hollywood, turning his attention to writing. In 1978, he published Chrome, a science fiction novel that included openly gay characters, a bold move at the time and a reflection of the life he had lived. George Nader's story is less about fame and more about quiet defiance. He lived with dignity and integrity, showing that authenticity, even in the shadows, can leave a powerful mark on Hollywood history. Clifton Webb. With his aristocratic air and sharp wit, Clifton Webb made a name for himself playing sophisticated, often snobbish characters in films like Laura and The Razor's Edge. But behind his signature screen presence was a man whose private life remained tightly guarded and quietly unconventional. Webb never married and lived with his mother, Mabel, well into adulthood, a relationship that became the subject of both gossip and admiration in Hollywood circles. Though he never addressed his sexuality publicly, insiders widely acknowledged that he was gay, and he made little effort to pretend otherwise within his trusted social circles. He was part of the elegant, coded world of mid-century Hollywood, where queerness was understood but rarely spoken aloud. Webb surrounded himself with artistic, theater-minded friends and moved through the industry with charm and precision, avoiding scandal but never quite blending in with the leading man archetype studios favored. Despite his private nature, Webb was known for his loyalty, intellect, and biting humor. His work, particularly in roles that subtly challenged traditional masculinity, gave him a unique space in Hollywood history. Clifton Webb didn't play by the usual rules, and he didn't have to. With style, grace, and quiet resistance, he created space for a different kind of stardom, one defined more by refinement than conformity. Paul Lynde. He was one of television's most distinctive voices, sharp, campy, and instantly recognizable. Paul Lynde built a career on comedic timing and flamboyant charm, often playing the quirky uncle or witty sidekick. But while his on-screen persona became iconic, his off-screen life was carefully shielded from public view. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Lynde was a fixture on game shows like Hollywood Squares, where his double entendres and sarcastic humor delighted audiences. To many, his sexuality was obvious, but in a time when even a hint of queerness could ruin a career, Lynde remained officially closeted. Friends and colleagues knew the truth. Lind was a gay man navigating fame in a world that wasn't ready to accept him. Despite his popularity, he struggled with the burden of secrecy. The contrast between his public success and private frustrations led to periods of loneliness and tension. His personal life remained largely private, though he shared long-term relationships with men over the years. Some say he masked his struggles with humor. Others saw his humor as a subtle form of protest, poking fun at societal expectations without ever naming them. Paul Lynde never formally came out, but his legacy as a trailblazer in entertainment remains clear. Through his wit and singular style, he brought visibility to a kind of queerness that wasn't yet safe to speak aloud, and left behind a blueprint for being bold within boundaries. Raymond Burr. To audiences, he was the steady, intelligent presence of Perry Mason and Ironside, a symbol of integrity and composure. But behind the scenes, Raymond Burr led a life filled with carefully constructed stories meant to protect his deepest truth. Throughout his career, Burr crafted a personal history that included a tragic marriage and the death of a young son. These tales, however, were later revealed to be fictional. In reality, Burr never married and had no children. His longtime companion was actor and producer Robert Benavides, with whom he shared a quiet life for more than 30 years. The couple maintained a vineyard together and built a home away from Hollywood's spotlight. While they never officially confirmed the nature of their relationship, those who knew them understood the bond they shared was far more than professional. Burr went to great lengths to maintain privacy, not out of shame, but out of necessity. The era simply wouldn't allow a leading man to live openly. His fabricated stories weren't lies for fame, they were shields for survival. Even after his passing, Benavides became the caretaker of Burr's legacy, continuing their shared work and honoring the life they built together. Raymond Burr's story is one of love lived in the shadows, an actor who embodied justice on screen while quietly navigating a world that offered little of it behind the curtain. Cesar Romero. With his suave charm and signature mustache, Cesar Romero dazzled audiences for decades. Known for roles in films like The Little Princess and as the Joker in the 1960s Batman TV series, he brought a theatrical flair to everything he did. But off-screen, Romero remained an elusive figure, especially when it came to his private life. Though he never publicly discussed his relationships, rumors swirled for years about Romero's preference for men. Industry insiders spoke of his dashing presence at private Hollywood parties, often accompanied by other men. Yet, he never confirmed or denied these whispers, choosing instead to keep his personal life entirely off limits. Romero's decision to stay single throughout his life only fueled speculation. Still, he maintained his gentlemanly image, rarely found in scandal columns and always speaking with grace and diplomacy in interviews. His discretion made him a welcome guest in Hollywood circles, where he was both respected and well-liked. While some stories about him veered into myth, the respect he commanded within the industry was very real. He worked steadily for decades, bringing charisma to roles across genres and generations. Cesar Romero's legacy is one of style, mystery, and carefully preserved dignity. Though he left much unsaid, he carved out a long, successful career while quietly defying the era's rigid expectations. Charles Lawton. With a commanding voice and a face made for character roles, Charles Lawton was one of classic Hollywood's most respected actors. From The Hunchback of Notre Dame to Mutiny on the Bounty, his performances were unforgettable. But while his talent was universally praised, his personal life remained complex and cloaked in discretion. Lawton was married to actress Elsa Lanchester for over 3 decades. Their marriage, however, was unconventional. Though they presented as a devoted couple, it was widely understood in close circles that Lawton was attracted to men. Lanchester acknowledged this in her memoirs, noting that theirs was a bond built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than traditional romance. In a time when public knowledge of same-sex relationships could end a career, Lawton kept his personal truth deeply private. He focused instead on his craft, bringing emotional nuance and intelligence to each role. Off-screen, he was known to be introspective, often more comfortable in the company of books and quiet dinners than Hollywood parties. His directorial effort, The Night of the Hunter, is now considered a masterpiece. further proof of his artistry and depth. Though he never openly discussed his sexuality, his life offers a glimpse into the emotional negotiations many stars of his era were forced to make. Charles Lton left behind a legacy of brilliance on screen and quiet complexity behind it. An actor who gave everything to his art while shielding the rest from view. Laurence Olivier. Regarded as one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, Laurence Olivier brought Shakespeare to life with a depth and grandeur rarely seen on stage or screen. His commanding presence and masterful technique made him a revered figure in both British and American cinema. Yet behind the curtain, whispers of a more complex personal life followed him throughout his career. Olivier's marriages, first to actress Jill Esmond and later to Vivien Leigh, were closely watched by the public. Both relationships were full of drama and intensity, especially his stormy union with Leigh. But within theater circles, rumors quietly persisted about his relationships with men, including a long-speculated connection with actor Danny Kaye. Though never publicly confirmed, their close companionship and frequent collaborations drew lasting attention. In private letters and reflections, Olivier hinted at a fluid sense of identity, though he never made direct statements about his orientation. Close friends described him as emotionally intuitive and artistically open, traits that often blurred boundaries in his personal life. In a time when such openness could threaten a career, discretion was not just a choice, but a necessity. Regardless of what remained unspoken, Olivier's legacy in the world of acting is unmatched. His performances in Hamlet, Richard III, and Wuthering Heights set a standard still admired today. Behind the polished image, there may have been personal truths hidden in plain sight. William Haynes. Before Hollywood became a machine of carefully polished illusions, William Haynes made a decision few others dared. He chose authenticity over fame. In the 1920s, he was one of the most popular leading men of the silent film era, with charm, confidence, and a smile that lit up the screen. But his greatest role may have been the one he played in real life, as a man who refused to hide who he loved. Haynes lived openly with his partner, Jimmy Shields, at a time when same-sex relationships were hidden behind studio PR campaigns and sham marriages. The couple didn't keep their relationship secret from friends or colleagues, though the public was shielded from the truth. Their openness drew the ire of MGM's Louis B. Mayer, who gave Haynes an ultimatum: end the relationship or lose his career. Haynes chose love. With his acting career over, he turned to interior design and flourished. He and Shields opened a business together and quickly attracted elite Hollywood clients, including Joan Crawford and Ronald Reagan. Their success in design eventually eclipsed his time in film. They remained partners for nearly 5 decades, becoming one of the rare examples of enduring love in Hollywood, regardless of era or orientation. William Haynes didn't just challenge the system, he rewrote the rules. His story remains one of quiet defiance, lived on his own terms in a time that demanded silence. Jeremy Brett. Audiences remember Jeremy Brett for his electrifying portrayal of Sherlock Holmes in the long-running British TV series, a performance marked by intensity, elegance, and a razor-sharp intellect. But while his version of Holmes captivated millions, Brett himself was a man navigating deep personal complexities that remained mostly hidden from public view. Privately, Brett was known to have relationships with both men and women, though he never spoke openly about his orientation. In an era when silence was the safest choice, especially for a stage and television actor, he lived with discretion. Friends described him as deeply emotional, romantic, and loyal, traits that often conflicted with the guarded persona he maintained in public. Brett was briefly married to actress Anna Massey, but the marriage ended after a few years. While some speculated about the reasons behind their separation, neither spoke publicly about the details. Instead, Brett poured his energy into acting, channeling his emotional depth into characters that often mirrored his own inner struggles. Later in life, he suffered from bipolar disorder, which added further layers to the emotional intensity he brought to his roles. Though he kept his private life closely guarded, those who knew him recognized the quiet courage it took to live authentically within a system that discouraged it. Jeremy Brett's life was one of artistry and subtle defiance, a reminder that even the most composed figures often carry untold stories just beneath the surface. John Gielgud. Sir John Gielgud was theatrical royalty. His mastery of Shakespeare and stagecraft made him one of the most revered actors of the 20th century. With a career spanning more than 7 decades, he became a bridge between classical tradition and modern performance. Yet, for much of his life, he carried the burden of being a gay man in a deeply conservative era. In 1953, Gilgud was arrested for importuning in a public restroom, a charge related to soliciting another man. The scandal could have destroyed his career. Instead, the public and artistic community rallied around him, and he returned to the stage just days later to a standing ovation. His quiet resilience in the face of humiliation made an impact far beyond the theater. Though never a vocal activist, Gilgud lived with increasing openness in his later years. He formed a long-term partnership with Martin Hensler, and while he didn't speak frequently about their relationship, it was widely acknowledged by those close to him. Gilgud's dignity, wit, and humanity earned him lasting respect. His handling of personal adversity with quiet grace offered a powerful example at a time when many chose silence out of fear. John Gielgud's legacy lies not only in his unmatched performances, but also in the subtle courage with which he navigated a world not yet ready to embrace him fully. Van Johnson. He was the fresh-faced boy next door, the all-American leading man of 1940s MGM musicals and wartime dramas. Van Johnson charmed audiences with his wholesome looks, affable demeanor, and breezy charm. But beneath the surface of his carefully managed image was a more complex life shaped by studio contracts and personal silence. During the peak of his fame, Johnson's sexuality was the subject of persistent rumors. MGM, keen on preserving his marketability to female fans, was said to have gone to great lengths to maintain appearances. In a particularly strategic move, studio boss Louis B. Mayer reportedly orchestrated Johnson's marriage to Evie Wynn, the ex-wife of fellow MGM actor Keenan Wynn. The marriage came swiftly and, to some, suspiciously, adding fuel to the speculation. While Johnson never publicly addressed the rumors, those close to him noted the tension between his public image and private self. Some biographers and Hollywood insiders have since suggested that his marriage was more of a studio arrangement than a romantic union. Throughout his life, Johnson maintained an image of politeness and professionalism. He worked consistently, even as his star faded, and never courted scandal. Yet, the silence around his personal identity reflects the emotional constraints many actors faced in a system built on illusion. Van Johnson's story is a reminder that even Hollywood's most cheerful faces often hid deeper, more complicated truths behind the spotlight. Richard Chamberlain. For decades, Richard Chamberlain was television royalty. With his breakout role in Dr. Kildare, and later as the brooding priest in The Thornbirds, he captured the hearts of millions. Known for his poise, intensity, and classic good looks, Chamberlain played romantic leads with such ease that few questioned the off-screen truth he worked so hard to conceal. Throughout the height of his career in the 1960s and 70s, Chamberlain lived in the shadow of Hollywood's expectations. He kept his relationships with men private, knowing that coming out could mean the end of his career. For many years, he shared his life with partner Martin Rabbit, but the relationship remained unspoken in the public eye. In interviews, Chamberlain later admitted that fear had kept him silent for decades. Only in 2003, with the release of his memoir, Shattered Love, did he openly acknowledge his identity. The decision came not with fanfare, but with a quiet honesty that resonated deeply with those who had followed his work and his silence for years. Though he played characters torn by inner conflict, it was Chamberlain's own journey that offered perhaps the most touching narrative. His story reflects the enormous pressure placed on actors to deny their truth, and the liberating power of finally embracing it. Richard Chamberlain's legacy is not only one of talent, but of the slow, brave emergence into light after years behind the curtain. Hollywood's golden age shimmered with elegance and stardom, but behind the glamour were lives shaped by silence, coded relationships, and quiet resilience. The men in this story weren't just actors, they were pioneers in their own quiet way, navigating a world that demanded they mask essential parts of themselves just to survive. Their journeys reveal how identity and artistry often collided in an era of strict image control. Some chose discretion, others risked it all, but each left behind more than roles. They left clues, legacies, and courage for those who followed. If this story gave you a new perspective on Hollywood's hidden history, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from the past.